It started with a cough. Not a dramatic announcement, not a blaring siren, but a dry cough from the Galactic Empire's executioner as he adjusted his helmet and tapped the microphone, live on every human screen. The camera zoomed in awkwardly, capturing the cold, indifferent flicker of Imperial technology as the execution stage was revealed, a brutal metallic platform hanging in the void, Earth's most decorated general kneeling at its center, bloodied but proud. In kitchens, bars, schools, and living rooms across Earth, people froze mid-bite, mid-sentence, mid-laugh. And then came the laugh. Not from Earth, but from the executioner himself, who chuckled at some private joke before addressing the galaxy. Ladies and gentlemen of this pathetic backwater planet, today we make an example. Humanity's bravest has kneeled before us. This is what your courage earns. The screen glitched slightly, a buzzing hum filling the airwaves. And in that fleeting pause before the blade fell, a farmer in Nebraska hurled his half-eaten sandwich at the screen and barked, "This is why I don't pay my taxes." Everyone laughed, even as they felt the dread. The Imperial blade hissed as it activated, its edge glowing white-hot, positioned above General Marcus Rain's bowed neck. His uniform, torn and singed, bore medals now irrelevant to the Empire. The silence stretched until the executioner gave a lazy hand signal, and the blade fell in one clean swipe. No ceremony, no speech from the condemned. Just cold efficiency. Earth's general was dead, and the Empire wanted every human to witness it, savor the helplessness, drown in rage and despair. The broadcast didn't end immediately. Instead, the Imperial announcer stepped forward again, his voice dripping with arrogance. "Earth, your generals die alone and kneeling. You have no defenders left. You have no future. Submit, or be destroyed." Then the signal cut abruptly, leaving humanity stunned. But something unexpected followed. As the screens across Earth went black, a static crackle rippled through communications networks, followed by a single line of text on every device, phone, television, even billboards. The message read simply, "Asset 13 authorization confirmed." And below it, a timestamp that counted down from 24 hours. In control rooms around the world, presidents, generals, and analysts scrambled, yelling over each other, demanding answers. What is Asset 13? Why now? Who authorized this? Inside a dimly lit conference room beneath the United Nations, the President of Earth sat frozen, eyes fixed on the blinking countdown projected on the far wall. Around the table, a mix of military brass and political advisors whispered frantically. Only one figure moved with purpose, a woman in her 60s, silver hair tightly braided, wearing a plain gray uniform devoid of insignia. She slid a slim black file onto the polished table. The label on its front was stark, almost casual, classified Asset 13. The President met her gaze. "Tell me this isn't what I think it is." The woman allowed herself a small, humorless smile. "We locked him away for a reason. We hoped we'd never need him again." The President leaned forward, voice tight. "Is it time?" The woman nodded once. "It's time." Far below that room, deeper than any bunker, in a facility long erased from official maps, a single steel door stood sealed. Behind it, a man sat on a wooden stool, playing chess with himself. He moved the pieces lazily, absently humming an old tune no one else remembered. When the red warning light above the door began to pulse, he paused, tilted his head as if listening to distant music, and smiled. "About time. I was getting bored talking to myself." Then he stood up, brushed imaginary dust from his tattered combat fatigues, and stretched as if waking from a nap. In living rooms and bars across the planet, people still sat glued to blank screens, struggling to process what they'd just witnessed. At one table in a pub, an old man raised his glass and said loudly, "They executed our general and think that's the end? They've forgotten what planet they're dealing with." His friends laughed bitterly, one replying, "If they think we're finished, they don't know about Nebraska." Another voice chimed in, "No, it won't be Nebraska this time. It'll be him." That comment silenced the group. They all knew the legend. Him didn't need a name. Meanwhile, back in that secure facility, the steel door hissed open slowly. A voice crackled from an old speaker, hesitant and official. Colonel Eric Kale, Asset 13, you are hereby released from containment under Article 001 of Earth's Emergency Charter. Kale didn't look at the camera. He just walked toward the exit, a half-smile curling his lips. Outside the door stood a nervous young officer holding a dossier. Sir, my orders are to brief you. Kale stopped inches from the officer, leaned in, and said softly, save your breath. I've seen the broadcast. You need me to remind them what terror really looks like. And with that, he walked past, leaving the officer frozen, clutching the unopened folder. Words spread fast across military channels and civilian networks alike. News anchors, still pale from covering General Rain's execution, now tried to explain what Asset 13 meant. Some called it Earth's last hope. Others whispered it was Earth's most dangerous secret. Conspiracy forums exploded with wild theories about Kale's history, some claiming he was genetically engineered, others that he'd died and been resurrected in secret programs. But no one knew the full truth. Not yet. In orbit above Earth, hidden in the shadows of the moon, the Empire's observation ships picked up strange transmissions. Codewords from Earth's old military archives, codes that hadn't been used in decades. Their analysts frowned, confused. They dismissed it at first, until one technician gasped aloud. Sir, that call sign, it's real. The Imperial captain narrowed his eyes. What call sign? The technician hesitated. Sir, it's Asset 13. The captain snorted. A relic. A myth. Let them play their little games. This is over. But deep down, even he felt a chill. The Empire had executed Earth's general live on camera, sure they had crushed their spirit. What they didn't know, what they couldn't have known, was that Earth didn't crumble when challenged. Earth didn't kneel. And now, Earth wasn't preparing for surrender. It was preparing to release something it hadn't unleashed in decades. In the bowels of the Empire's flagship, a single communication ping arrived, encoded in an ancient Earth protocol they hadn't seen since their first contact war. The message was brief, and signed, and terrifying. It read simply, I'm coming. The countdown continued. 23 hours and 59 minutes remaining. Earth had been humiliated on a galactic stage. But in that humiliation lay a terrible promise. Asset 13 was free. And the galaxy would soon remember why Earth was the one planet even the stars feared to provoke. Colonel Eric Kale did not walk out of the containment facility so much as he sauntered, as if he had all the time in the world and nothing particularly urgent to do, which was exactly what made people nervous. The young officer trailing him babbled protocol updates, clearance codes, mission brief summaries, but Kale barely listened. His eyes scanned the corridors as if reacquainting himself with an old friend. He hadn't seen this place in decades, and yet nothing seemed to have changed. The same dull lighting, the same stale recycled air, the same hollow thrum of machines operating far below human understanding. Kale smirked to himself, wondering if the bureaucrats who built this place had honestly believed that steel walls could contain what he truly was. Maybe they had. Until today. Above ground, the emergency meeting of Earth's Defense Council was descending into chaos. Arguments flew across the table like artillery shells. Some insisted they should abort the release and try diplomacy again. Others said it was too late for peace. Earth had no choice but to deploy Kale. One senator banged a fist on the table and shouted he's a maniac. We locked him away for a reason. You can't just send him out there like a rabid dog and expect it to end well. The gray-haired woman who had delivered the classified file sat quietly until the shouting died down. Then she leaned forward, fingers steepled, and spoke in a voice that cut through the noise. None of you understand what's at stake. This is not about choosing the lesser evil. It's about choosing the only evil left that terrifies the Empire. In the subterranean transport, Kale sat calmly as the armored vehicle hummed toward the extraction pad. He was handed a fresh uniform, sleek black with no insignia, no rank, no flag. It was fitting. He no longer served any country. He served only the cold arithmetic of survival and retaliation. As he pulled on the jacket, he noticed something stuffed in one of the pockets, a small packet of chewing gum. Kale laughed aloud, startling the soldier seated across from him. The soldier shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. Kale unwrapped the gum slowly, popped it into his mouth, and began chewing with exaggerated satisfaction. The taste was synthetic, cheap, and perfect. Some poor bureaucrat had probably forgotten it there. Or maybe it was a gift from an old friend. Either way, it felt right. When he stepped onto the tarmac, a small team of technicians and intelligence officers were waiting nervously, their eyes avoiding direct contact. A transport shuttle sat behind them, humming gently, ready to take him wherever he ordered. Kale took a slow breath and then addressed them in a dry voice. "So who's in charge here?" A young woman with trembling hands stepped forward, datapad in hand. "Sir, we have prepared a mission briefing for you. Primary targets, secondary objectives, infiltration routes, asset extraction protocols." Kale cut her off with a lazy wave of his hand. "I don't need your briefing. I saw the broadcast." General Rain didn't beg. He didn't flinch. "The Empire thinks we're broken now. That's their first mistake. The second mistake was letting me out." In orbit, aboard the Empire's flagship Dominion, Admiral Tuvok reviewed his fleet's positioning around Earth. He was confident. His warships were positioned to block any attempt at retaliation. Earth's remaining military assets were laughable compared to the Empire's power. He chuckled as his junior officers reported sensor sweeps, tactical readouts, and meaningless chatter from panicked Earth forces. "Let them tremble," he said with a sneer. "This planet will kneel by tomorrow. And then we will burn it." But even as he spoke, a strange blip appeared on the sensor grid, a single unauthorized shuttle rising from Earth's surface. The sensor technician frowned and tapped the screen. "Sir, this shuttle, it's broadcasting an old Earth clearance code." "Clearance code? What clearance code?" Tuvok barked. The technician squinted. "Asset 13, sir." Tuvok froze. He had heard the stories. Everyone in the upper ranks had. But they were just that, stories, weren't they? Inside the shuttle, Kale relaxed in the pilot's chair, one boot up on the console, chewing gum, humming softly to himself. The onboard AI offered a tactical analysis of the Imperial fleet. Kale ignored most of it. He had memorized the layout decades ago. The Empire was predictable. Their arrogance made them predictable. And that was exactly why they would lose. As he approached the perimeter of the Imperial blockade, the flagship Dominion sent an automated hail. "Unidentified vessel, this is Dominion. You are ordered to stand down and prepare for boarding." Kale pressed the comm button and spoke in a tone that was almost cheerful. "Negative, Dominion. I'm not here to negotiate. I'm here to remind you why Earth hasn't surrendered yet." He ended the transmission before they could respond. Back on Earth, the Defense Council watched the situation unfold on live feeds. The countdown timer continued to tick down. Tensions ran high. The president leaned toward the defense minister and whispered, "Do you think he can really do it?" The defense minister didn't answer right away. Then, with a weary sigh, he said he won't just do it. He'll enjoy it. And when he's done, there won't be enough pieces left of that fleet to identify. Kale's shuttle reached the outer perimeter of the blockade. The Empire's smaller warships began maneuvering to intercept. Kale smiled and tapped a button. The shuttle's engines cut out. The vessel drifted lazily, power signatures flickering erratically as if malfunctioning. A trap, but a good one. The Empire's boarding crew didn't hesitate. Their transport latched onto the shuttle's airlock, and armored troopers began cutting their way in, assuming their prey was crippled and desperate. What they didn't know was that Kale wasn't even in the pilot's seat anymore. He was already in their transport, crouched behind a bulkhead, blade in hand. The first two soldiers who entered didn't even have time to scream. As the Dominion's bridge officers scrambled to make sense of the garbled reports coming from their boarding crew, Kale systematically worked his way through the Imperial ship, leaving a trail of silent bodies in his wake. His movements were methodical, almost relaxed. He knew their training, their patterns, their weaknesses. Every corridor, every junction, Every armory was familiar to him because he had helped design their boarding tactics back when he was still a young operative during the First Empire Contact War. This was his playground. Kale finally reached the central data core of the Dominion and plugged in a small device no larger than his thumb. It activated immediately, flooding the Imperial network with false orders, misinformation, and self-destruct commands. The Empire's entire blockade would be in disarray before they realized what had happened. As he worked, he whispered to himself, "They think they executed Earth's future today. But all they did was wake me up." As Kale slipped out of the Dominion's data core chamber, explosions began rippling through several of the fleet's ships. Back aboard Earth's control center, analysts stared in disbelief as Imperial ships began firing on each other, their formation collapsing into chaos. The countdown still ticked, but Kale was already ahead of schedule. The defense minister allowed himself a grim smile. The Empire thought this was over. They thought they had won. But Kale wasn't just a weapon. He was a war all by himself. And the war had just begun. Aboard the Dominion, Admiral Tuvok gripped the railing of his command dais so tightly that his knuckles turned white. All around him, his bridge crew shouted conflicting reports, alarms blared, and tactical holograms flashed red warnings across every console. His proud fleet, arrayed so perfectly around Earth just moments ago, was dissolving into a mess of erratic maneuvers and friendly fire. 2 frigates collided in the distance, their shields flickering and failing before erupting in twin fireballs that lit up the darkness of orbit. Tuvok's voice cut through the chaos as he bellowed, "Find that shuttle and destroy it now." His words sounded confident, but inside, doubt gnawed at him. The codes they had intercepted earlier, the name whispered across frightened comm channels, Asset 13. Tuvok had laughed at first, but he was no longer laughing. Somewhere in the back of his mind a memory stirred, an old report from the Empire's first war against Earth, mentioning a ghost soldier who infiltrated entire fleets alone. It could not be the same man. It was impossible. And yet the Dominion itself was now under siege from within, and Tuvok had no explanations. Kale moved silently through the Dominion's maintenance corridors, every step measured, every action deliberate. His infiltration had gone exactly as planned. The shuttle they thought they were tracking was empty, rigged with a basic decoy program. The real Kale was already aboard before their sensors even realized it. He moved past a pair of officers in heavy armor, his combat knife flashing once, twice, leaving them crumpled quietly on the deck. As he paused at a junction, he pulled a tiny device from his belt and pressed it to the bulkhead. It emitted a soft chime as it connected to the Dominion's internal systems. A smile crept across Kale's face as he watched data stream onto a small handheld display. Every defense protocol, every weapon system control, every security camera feed was now exposed to him. The Empire's flagship was no longer theirs. It belonged to him. Back on Earth, Defense Council members leaned over monitors, watching the live tactical feed with stunned silence. Imperial ships drifted out of formation, some firing at phantoms that didn't exist, others simply going dark as Kale's virus wormed its way through their systems. The defense minister whispered to the president, "He's dismantling them piece by piece." The president asked quietly, "Does he even need our fleet to intervene?" The minister shook his head slowly, "No. He's doing this alone." Inside the Dominion security control room, Kale stepped over the body of the last remaining guard, casually wiping his blade on the officer's pristine white uniform. He tapped a few commands on the central console and brought up the feed of the Dominion's bridge. Tuvok's panicked face appeared on the monitor. Kale chuckled softly and activated the comm link. "Admiral Tuvok, I assume you're wondering what is happening to your beautiful fleet." Tuvok froze, his face going pale as he recognized the voice. "Who are you?" he demanded, though the answer was already forming in his mind. Kale leaned in toward the camera, his face illuminated by the flickering screens around him. "I'm the reminder, Admiral. The reminder that Earth doesn't kneel. You executed General Rain on live broadcast. So now I'm here to return the favor." Tuvok snarled, "Guards, get to security control now." But he knew it was too late. Kale's voice was calm, almost amused as he added, "Also, Admiral, while I have your attention, you might want to brace yourself. I'm about to disable your artificial gravity. Kale hit the command, and across the Dominion, chaos erupted anew as gravity fields collapsed. Officers floated helplessly into the air, control panels and tools tumbled in zero-gravity confusion, and one unlucky technician flailed as he drifted directly into a suspended data conduit, knocking himself unconscious. Kale laughed softly as he watched the feed. This was the kind of chaos he thrived in, the type of scenario where rules broke down and only instinct and experience mattered. He moved quickly now, using his familiarity with Imperial architecture to navigate straight toward the engine core. Meanwhile, deep in Imperial territory, the Emperor himself was being briefed. The Emperor's advisors spoke quickly and nervously, their words a tangle of fear and uncertainty. There is a single human operative aboard the Dominion. He's already compromised their systems, my lord. The Emperor's expression darkened. Asset 13. I thought he was dead. An aide hesitated before answering. We all did, my lord. The Emperor stood slowly, gripping the edge of his throne. Then deploy the assassins. Send everything we have. This one man is worth 1,000 fleets if he succeeds. As Imperial assassins prepared to deploy, Kale was already working inside the Dominion's engine room. He set charges carefully, methodically, humming to himself as he worked. The timer on the charges flashed a 5-minute countdown. Enough time to finish the next step. As he armed the final charge, he paused to admire the engineering around him. The Dominion's engine core pulsed with energy, the very heart of Imperial military power. And soon it would be dust. Before leaving, Kale attached one last device to the main reactor, a transmitter. It began broadcasting a signal, not to Earth, but to every nearby Imperial ship on the same frequency they had used to broadcast General Rain's execution. It was poetic. They had used that frequency to humiliate Earth. Now Kale would use it to show them terror. As the feed went live, Imperial officers across the fleet saw Kale's face staring at them from every screen. He didn't shout. He didn't threaten. He simply spoke in a calm, measured voice. I was locked away because your leaders feared me. Earth feared me too. But they feared me for the right reasons. The reason you should have feared me is because I don't take orders. I don't follow protocols. I don't stop. You executed our general. Now I'm here to execute your entire fleet. Behind him, the charges on the Dominion's engine core began to glow. Tuvok screamed at his crew to sever the link, to cut power, to eject the engine core, anything, but it was far too late. Kale gave a small wave to the camera as he stepped back and whispered goodbye, Admiral. Then he vanished into the shadows just before the Dominion's engines erupted in a blinding explosion that tore through the flagship's hull and sent shockwaves across the Imperial fleet. Earth's monitors flared as data from the blast poured in, confirming what they already suspected. The Dominion was gone. The flagship of the Imperial fleet destroyed from within by a single man. On Earth, crowds gathered in public squares and city streets, watching the images broadcast from orbit. Where hours before they had watched their general executed in despair, they now cheered, shouting Kale's name. Children who had hidden from the broadcast of Rain's execution now danced in the streets. Across the galaxy, Imperial vassal worlds and rebellious colonies saw the same broadcast. The man they called Asset 13 had become a symbol of resistance overnight. The Imperial throne room was silent except for the faint crackle of static still hissing from a holoscreen that moments ago had displayed the destruction of the Dominion. The Emperor sat rigid, unmoving, his face pale and his expression unreadable, but his eyes burned with something dangerous. Around him, his advisors whispered frantically, offering explanations, excuses, desperate strategies, but he did not acknowledge them. He stared into the middle distance, consumed by a memory he had buried long ago. The face of Colonel Eric Kale. It was impossible, yet undeniable. This man should have been dead. Decades ago, when the Empire first clashed with Earth, Kale was already a name spoken in fear even among Imperial officers. He had walked through their defenses like a phantom, sowing chaos and death. When that war ended in a fragile truce, the Emperor had sworn that Kale was finished, buried deep by his own people, locked away so that even Earth could no longer control him. And yet here he was, alive, active, and more dangerous than ever. The Emperor's voice, when it finally came, was a cold whisper. Send the wraiths. His advisors froze. No one wanted to question him, but this order was extreme. The wraiths were not soldiers. They were not assassins in the traditional sense. They were monsters engineered in the Empire's deepest black labs, unleashed only when all other means failed. They did not negotiate, they did not capture, they simply erased. The Emperor continued without looking up. Send them all. He's coming here. You know he will. The advisors nodded and fled to execute the order. Across the Empire, in hidden facilities and shadowed strongholds, encrypted commands flashed through secure channels. Sleeper cells were activated, their members already anticipating this day but hoping it would never come. The order was absolute: destroy Eric Kale at all costs before he could reach the Imperial capital. But it was already too late to stop what had begun. Kale was not heading straight for the Imperial capital yet. His stolen shuttle coasted silently along an ancient smuggling route that bypassed most Imperial sensors. The stars outside the viewport glittered coldly, indifferent to war, death, or vengeance. Kale sat at the controls, chewing gum, eyes half-lidded in thought. The onboard computer listed dozens of Imperial ships scrambling to contain the chaos he had unleashed. He smiled faintly at their predictable panic. They had no idea where he was going next. In fact, either did he. Not precisely. Kale was operating on instinct now, following old memories and older grudges. On Earth, the Defense Council was still in stunned disbelief. The images of the Dominion's destruction had been played on a loop across every screen, and yet they still struggled to process it. The President sat in his office, staring at a paused frame of Kale waving to the camera moments before the explosion. "What have we done?" he whispered. The Defense Minister entered quietly. "We did what we had to do." The President turned. "And now? What happens next?" The Minister did not answer. Instead, he poured himself a glass of water and took a long, slow drink. "We wait. Kale's war isn't over. It's just beginning." In a remote sector, Kale docked his shuttle at a derelict outpost that once served as a forward base during the First War. The place was abandoned, its corridors coated in dust and silence. But Kale remembered every corner, every bulkhead. He walked its length with a strange nostalgia, as though revisiting the ruins of a childhood home. In a hidden chamber, he activated a console that hummed weakly to life. The screen flickered, then stabilized, revealing a map of secret Imperial research sites. Kale's gaze narrowed. He wasn't heading straight for the Emperor yet because there was something he needed first. Back on the Imperial capital, the Emperor's personal guard doubled patrols around the palace. Defensive grids were charged, shield generators recalibrated, and interceptor squadrons deployed. Every inch of airspace was monitored. Yet no one felt safe. The Emperor himself paced his private chambers, haunted not only by Kale's return but by the uncomfortable truth he had concealed for decades. Kale had not simply been Earth's most dangerous operative. He had been the Empire's experiment once. Long before open war had broken out, Kale had trained in an Imperial black program designed to create the perfect infiltrator. He was their creation, refined through Imperial methods, turned against them when Earth learned of their treachery. He was the unfinished product of a nightmare project the Empire had believed erased from history. But Kale remembered. And now he was coming back. Kale's next destination was Site Theta 7, a remote research station orbiting a dying star. It was there that the Empire had stored what Kale was after, the hidden archives from the black program that made him what he was. He wanted those records. Not for vengeance, not for curiosity, but for insurance. If he was going to face the Emperor, he would face him armed with every dirty secret the Empire had tried to bury. As Kale approached Theta 7, a squadron of Imperial interceptors closed in fast. The computer warned him of incoming fire, but Kale was already reacting. He killed the shuttle's main engines, letting it drift like space debris. The interceptors moved past him, their scanners fooled for just long enough. Kale launched himself from an airlock in a suit modified for silent approach. He was a ghost in the void, slipping between sensor grids and security beams until he reached the outer hull of Theta 7. Inside, the wraiths had already arrived. The Emperor's assassins moved like shadows, their armor designed to absorb light, their presence almost undetectable. But Kale was not fooled. He knew their tactics intimately, because during his training they had used him as the template for these monsters. His own instincts warned him the moment he stepped inside. He moved quickly, using the station's narrow corridors to his advantage, forcing close quarters where his knowledge of their weaknesses gave him the edge. One wraith lunged from a corner, blade flashing, but Kale spun aside, slamming its helmet against the bulkhead with brutal precision. Another dropped from a ceiling vent only to meet a thrown combat knife straight through the visor. Kale fought them without hesitation, without mercy. This was not war to him. This was personal. Every step he took deeper into Theta 7 brought him closer to the chamber containing the archives. By the time he reached it, his suit was scratched and scorched, but he was uninjured, while the corridors behind him were littered with the bodies of dead wraiths. Kale stood before the archive chamber's heavy blast doors and smiled. He pressed a code he should not have known, but did. The doors hissed open. Inside, row upon row of storage cores gleamed in the dim light. All the Empire's sins, all their hidden truths, lay at his fingertips. He inserted a small device into the terminal, downloading everything. As the progress bar filled, he spoke quietly to himself. They thought they could erase me. They thought they could erase this. But history doesn't forget. I don't forget. Kale drifted in his stolen interceptor, a single silhouette against the endless stars, a man far too calm for someone who had just reduced an entire Imperial research station to slag. The data drive pulsed faintly in his hand, humming with the secrets of his origin, a history the Empire had buried but he had now unearthed completely. His face was still, unreadable, but behind that exterior his mind was working at blistering speed. There was no turning back. The Empire would no longer hunt him as a rogue asset. They would hunt him as the embodiment of their shame, their failure, and their fear. He had humiliated their fleets, destroyed their flagship, and now carried their darkest secrets. There was only one destination left. The Imperial capital itself. Inside the shuttle, Kale casually opened a ration packet and chewed slowly, as though he were heading to a vacation rather than the heart of the most fortified world in the galaxy. The onboard computer chimed with warnings. Security networks were tightening. Patrols increasing. Imperial assassins were being deployed in numbers not seen since the Emperor himself rose to power. Kale knew every trap they would set because he had helped design most of them decades ago. In a strange way, this was almost personal for him too. The Empire had turned him into what he was, then feared him so much they convinced Earth to lock him away. Now they would see what it meant to build something so dangerous it could no longer be controlled. Far away, on the Imperial capital, preparations were reaching a fever pitch. The Emperor stood at the highest tower of his citadel, his expression an icy mask as his commanders fed him updates. Dozens of planetary shields activated in overlapping patterns, preventing any ship from entering orbit without permission. Hundreds of fighter wings patrolled the atmosphere. Thousands of soldiers lined the streets, checkpoints erected at every intersection. The Emperor's voice was low but sharp as a knife when he spoke. He will come. He will come even knowing he cannot win. He always does. One general, bolder than the rest, dared to ask my lord, what if he succeeds? What if he reaches this very hall? The Emperor turned, his eyes colder than the vacuum of space. Then I will face him myself. But Kale was not coming in through orbit, at least not the way they expected. His path was far more audacious. As he approached the capital, he cut all active signals and let his interceptor drift into the debris field surrounding the planet, a graveyard of old Imperial warships and satellites long abandoned. His ship blended perfectly among the wreckage, slipping past their sensors. Once in position, he donned an old combat suit, matte black with no insignia, and propelled himself silently toward the planet's surface, a ghost among ghosts. The Empire's paranoia was vast, but its arrogance was even greater. They had prepared for fleets, for armies, for orbital bombardments. They had not prepared for one man to slip through the cracks. As Kale descended through the upper atmosphere, burning debris streaking around him like a meteor shower, Imperial analysts detected anomalies but dismissed them as sensor glitches. After all, who would attempt such a suicidal entry? By the time they realized the truth, Kale was already in the lower atmosphere, his trajectory bringing him directly above the Imperial Citadel itself. His descent module opened a few meters above the central plaza and he landed hard but upright, surrounded by confused soldiers who took precious seconds to react. It was seconds too long. Kale was already moving, striking with brutal efficiency, disabling weapons, dropping soldiers before they could even cry out. The plaza became a blur of motion, and then silence. Kale stood alone in the center, dust swirling around him, as alarms blared across the city. From the highest balcony, the Emperor watched as Kale stepped forward and raised his gaze, meeting the Emperor's eyes directly even from such a distance. No words passed between them, but an understanding settled like stone. This was inevitable. The Emperor turned sharply and ordered all inner defenses to full alert. In corridors lined with banners proclaiming Imperial dominance, soldiers scrambled to reinforce positions while security droids deployed from hidden compartments. The city's defenses folded inward, tightening around the citadel, the focus of centuries of Imperial power now reduced to one mission: stop Eric Kale. Inside the citadel, Kale moved like a phantom. Every trap was familiar. Every guard rotation was predictable. Every emergency protocol was something he had already anticipated. His mind worked several steps ahead of the defenders, turning their preparations against them. When security doors locked down, he rerouted power to overload circuits. When choke points were fortified, he found bypass routes they had long forgotten existed. The deeper he went, the more desperate the defenders became. Their fear was palpable, their morale disintegrating in the face of an enemy who was not an army but an unstoppable force wrapped in the shape of a man. In one grand hallway adorned with portraits of past emperors, Kale paused only briefly. His gaze swept across the faces of tyrants and conquerors before he raised a small device and triggered a controlled explosion that reduced the entire wall to rubble. The symbolism was not lost on him. History itself was coming down brick by brick, and he was the one pulling it apart. By the time Kale reached the grand staircase leading to the Emperor's private audience chamber, his suit was scorched and dented, but he was uninjured. Imperial soldiers at the top of the stairs hesitated, their weapons trembling in their hands. Kale took a single step forward and they broke, fleeing down side corridors, abandoning their posts entirely. He climbed the staircase slowly, deliberately, savoring the stillness after the storm. At the top, massive ornate doors loomed before him, engraved with the symbols of Imperial rule. Without hesitation, Kale placed an explosive charge at their base and stepped back. The blast echoed through the citadel, and the doors crashed inward. The Emperor stood alone at the far end of the chamber, clad in ceremonial armor, a gleaming blade in one hand. His face was calm but his eyes betrayed him, flickering with a mix of fear and rage. "You should have stayed buried, Kale," he said quietly. Kale stepped inside, unarmed but utterly confident. "You should have left Earth alone," he replied. The Emperor raised his blade and advanced slowly. "Your kind are weak. Earth is weak. But you were ours once. We made you. We perfected you." Kale's lips curled into a faint smile. "You perfected nothing. You built a monster, and then buried it because you couldn't control it. And now your monster has come home." As the two men closed the distance, the air seemed to crackle with tension. All the soldiers, all the fleets, all the assassins in the galaxy had failed to stop what was now inevitable. It was no longer a war between worlds. It was a reckoning between two men, one the architect of a galactic empire, the other its ultimate flaw, its shadow made flesh. And as Kale took his final steps forward, the Emperor realized too late that this was never about armies or battles or fleets. This was about a single decision made decades ago, a decision to create something so dangerous it could never truly be destroyed. Kale raised his hands, ready to finish what had begun so long ago. The chamber felt colder than the void outside as Kale and the Emperor circled each other, either rushing the inevitable. The vast hall was silent except for the faint hum of the Citadel's power systems and the slow, deliberate footsteps of the two men who had come to define this war. The Emperor's ceremonial blade gleamed under the soft light, but there was hesitation in his grip, as though his hand already knew this fight was lost. Kale, unarmed by choice, simply watched, his gaze calm, almost amused, as if this final confrontation was nothing more than a formality he had to observe before closing the last chapter. When the Emperor finally lunged, Kale moved with startling speed, sidestepping effortlessly and delivering a brutal punch to the Emperor's ribs that sent him stumbling backward. The blade clattered to the floor, its ceremonial weight useless against the sheer efficiency of Kale's violence. Outside the chamber, alarms still blared across the capital, but few dared approach the throne room. Word had spread that Kale had reached the Emperor himself, and with that knowledge, the resolve of Imperial soldiers shattered completely. Entire garrisons abandoned their posts, ships disengaged their patrols, and commanders quietly ordered retreat rather than face the monster they could not hope to stop. Kale's legend was no longer just a terrifying story told in briefings. It was reality, unfolding in real time, and it was contagious. Even as the Empire's forces disintegrated, broadcasts from across the galaxy began to show riots, rebellions, and mutinies as oppressed worlds realized that if Kale could reach the heart of Imperial power, then the Empire was not invincible. The shockwaves from this moment were spreading far faster than any weapon. Inside the throne room, the Emperor snarled, lunging again, this time with desperation, but Kale caught his arm and twisted hard, disarming him completely. The Emperor fell to his knees, breathing heavily, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cold. His voice cracked as he spoke. "What do you want, Kale? You could have come here quietly. You could have negotiated terms. Why this spectacle?" Kale crouched slightly, meeting the Emperor's gaze directly. "You know why. You made me into this, and then you buried me like a secret you were ashamed of. You taught me that diplomacy is a language for the weak, and then you killed Rain to send a message. Well, I'm here to send my message, loud and clear, to the entire galaxy." The Emperor trembled, not from the cold but from the realization that Kale's purpose was never conquest or glory. It was retribution. The kind of retribution that would become legend long after both of them were gone. The Citadel's internal communications array suddenly crackled to life. Kale's voice echoed not just within this chamber but across every Imperial broadcast channel, hijacking their communications grid. He spoke slowly, clearly, so that every citizen, soldier, and rebel would hear his words. "I am Eric Kale. You executed General Rain on live broadcast to humiliate Earth. You wanted to show that your empire was absolute. Well, I have come to show you that nothing is absolute. I have walked through your fleets, your assassins, your traps, and I am standing here now in the Emperor's hall. You built me to be your perfect weapon, and now I am yours no longer. To every world that kneels to this empire out of fear, look closely. Look at what fear really brings. The Emperor knelt before me today, and soon this empire will kneel too." His words rippled through every corner of the empire, carried not as a military announcement, but as a symbol of hope and defiance. For the first time in living memory, the empire looked weak. Vulnerable. Mortal. The Emperor's face twisted in rage as he tried to rise again, but Kale moved faster, pinning him with one arm while activating a small device with the other. The device projected a holographic image into the chamber, a live feed showing the Empire's outer colonies erupting in rebellion, warships changing allegiances, entire sectors declaring independence. The Emperor's carefully constructed illusion of control was collapsing faster than he could comprehend. Even as this unfolded, Earth's Defense Council watched the transmissions with a mix of awe and disbelief. The President turned to his advisors and spoke quietly. "He's done it. He's breaking the Empire not with armies but with symbols. A single man showing the galaxy that the Emperor bleeds." The Defense Minister, normally stoic and cynical, allowed himself a rare smile. "And he's enjoying every minute of it." Back in the Citadel, Kale finally stood, releasing the Emperor who collapsed fully to the ground, defeated in body and spirit. Kale took a slow breath, then addressed the Emperor directly, though his words were meant for the billions watching. Your reign is over. The Emperor looked up, hatred and exhaustion warring in his eyes. If you think this ends with me, you are wrong. The Empire is eternal. Kale shook his head slightly. No empire is eternal. You just fooled yourselves into believing it was. And now your own subjects know the truth. Instead of delivering a final blow, Kale turned and walked slowly toward the grand doors of the chamber. The Emperor watched in silence, realizing that this was the ultimate humiliation. Kale was not going to execute him on camera. He was going to leave him alive, broken, exposed to his people, forced to witness the collapse of everything he had built. As Kale reached the doorway, he paused and spoke without turning back. I don't need to kill you. Your people will handle that soon enough. And with that, he disappeared into the corridor, leaving the Emperor slumped alone in his grand hall. Outside, the capital was already changing. Crowds gathered in the streets, no longer afraid. Statues of the Emperor were being pulled down. Imperial banners burned in every district. Rebel ships circled above the planet but did not fire. They waited, watching, letting this moment play out. The transmission of Kale's speech played on a loop everywhere, his image etched into the hearts and minds of a galaxy that no longer saw the Empire as invincible. Kale slipped into the shadows, no longer needing to fight, no longer needing to prove anything. His work here was done. He made his way to a hidden docking bay where an old smuggling ship waited. The pilot, a grizzled veteran who recognized Kale immediately, gave a nervous nod. Where to? Kale smiled faintly, a rare and genuine expression. Nowhere. Everywhere. Just fly. As the ship lifted off, leaving the Imperial capital behind, Kale sat back and allowed himself a moment of peace. He had torn down an empire, not with fleets or armies, but by being exactly what they had built him to be, unstoppable, unpredictable, and unbound. The stars stretched out ahead, endless and free. Kale leaned his head back, closed his eyes, and for the first time in decades, breathed without the weight of orders, missions, or prisons hanging over him. Far behind, the Empire burned. Ahead, whatever came next was no longer his concern. His message had been sent. His legend had been written. And he had nothing left to prove. The pilot of the battered smuggling ship kept glancing at Kale, as if unsure whether he should speak or simply continue flying into the emptiness of space. Kale sat in the co-pilot's seat, legs stretched, arms crossed, and gaze distant, watching the stars blur as the ship pushed into deep space. The Imperial capital had already vanished behind them, nothing more than a fading point of light amid the void, but its collapse would echo for generations. The Emperor had been left alive by choice, and that choice was a sharper blade than any Kale had carried. The pilot cleared his throat nervously. So, where do we go now? The Empire's collapsing. Whole sectors are rebelling. Nobody's in charge out here. Kale did not look at him as he answered. That's the point. Let them figure it out themselves. We did our part. Out there in the galaxy, reports of revolt multiplied with every passing hour. Worlds that had been chained to the Empire for centuries were throwing off their shackles, Imperial garrisons either surrendering or disappearing as discipline evaporated. What no one realized yet was that the psychological blow Kale had delivered was far greater than any military defeat. The Empire had been built on fear, on the certainty of punishment for disobedience, on the myth that resistance was futile. By walking alone into the throne room and leaving the Emperor broken but alive, Kale had not only shattered that myth but had inverted it. Now it was the Emperor who feared his own people, and that fear spread like wildfire. In one distant colony, a group of miners who had lived under brutal Imperial rule for decades gathered around a dusty calm terminal, replaying Kale's speech again and again. They were laughing as they armed themselves, no longer afraid, no longer waiting for someone to liberate them. In another system, an entire Imperial fleet defected after watching the Dominion's destruction, joining a growing alliance of rebel worlds who no longer saw rebellion as suicide. Kale's name became a rallying cry, his image plastered on makeshift banners, painted on walls, etched into the sides of ships. Children who had never known anything but imperial rule now dreamed of the man who had walked through the Empire's fire and come out the other side smiling. But Kale himself felt none of this celebration. As the stars blurred past, he felt an unusual kind of emptiness. The mission that had been forced upon him was done. The Empire had been broken. Rain had been avenged. Earth was safe. Yet inside him, there was no joy, no triumph, just a quiet hollow where purpose had once burned. He had been created to fight, shaped to infiltrate and destroy, and now there was nothing left to fight. The galaxy could rebuild however it wanted. Kale no longer cared. The pilot's voice broke the silence again. Sir. I mean, Kale, you do know that there are a lot of people out there who think you should lead them now. They're calling you the liberator of the galaxy. Some want to crown you. Kale laughed softly for the first time since leaving the Citadel. Crown me? That would be rich. The galaxy finally breaks free of one emperor, and they want to give themselves another. He shook his head. I'm done. Let them figure out their own future. I'm not here to rule. I was never here to rule. On Earth, the Defense Council met for the first time without fear. The countdown clocks that had once haunted their days were gone. The screens that once showed Imperial fleets surrounding their planet now displayed images of celebration from colonies they had never even visited. The President sat quietly as messages of thanks flooded their networks, from rebel leaders, free worlds, and citizens who now considered Earth a symbol of hope. The Defense Minister spoke softly. He's gone, you know. We can't contact him. No tracking signal, no comms, nothing. The President nodded slowly. We shouldn't try. He did what we asked, more than we ever could have expected. Let him vanish if that's what he wants. We owe him that much. The minister raised a glass. To Kale. The room echoed the quiet toast. Their respect for the man mingled with relief that they would likely never have to ask anything of him again. Meanwhile, in the vast reaches of space, Kale's ship slipped quietly through asteroid fields and abandoned outposts, deliberately avoiding inhabited systems. He had no destination. Every port where his name was being spoken in reverence was a place he no longer wanted to visit. He had no interest in parades or statues or speeches. He had seen too much, done too much, and he knew better than anyone that peace was fragile and temporary. The galaxy would celebrate him today, maybe tomorrow, but eventually they would move on. History would distort his name, his deeds, his purpose. That was fine. It was inevitable. The pilot finally stopped trying to make conversation and focused on his controls, grateful for the silence. Kale allowed himself to close his eyes, listening to the steady hum of the engines and feeling, for the first time in decades, a quiet that was not born from discipline or duty but from freedom. He did not know where he would go next. He did not care. There were no more missions, no more orders, no more locked doors or hidden cells. In the imperial capital, the Emperor sat alone in the ruins of his throne room, the shattered doors left unrepaired, the banners torn and the grand hall empty. His most loyal guards were gone. His advisors had either fled or been executed by mobs. His power was nothing but an illusion that even he could no longer believe in. And though he lived, he understood that Kale had inflicted a wound deeper than death. The galaxy he had ruled with iron certainty no longer listened to his commands. Every report that reached him told of chaos, rebellion, defiance. Worlds he had never feared losing were slipping through his fingers, and he could not even muster the will to fight for them. In leaving him alive, Kale had given him the one punishment that would last far longer than death. A throne without power. A ruler without subjects. Somewhere far beyond the reach of any empire, Kale sat watching the stars drift slowly by. A small smile touched his lips as he thought of the absurdity of it all. They had called him a monster. A weapon. A shadow. And yet now they would tell stories of him as a hero. The irony was almost too perfect. He had never wanted to be any of those things. He had only wanted to be free. And finally, in the ruins of an empire that had tried to own him, he was. As the ship's engines pulsed softly, Kale leaned back in his seat, stretching his arms behind his head. Tell the galaxy not to call me again, he muttered with a laugh. Unless they've got something even crazier than this. The pilot, startled by the sudden comment, turned and asked, "What was that?" Cale shook his head, closing his eyes once more. "Nothing. Just talking to myself." The ship sailed on into the stars, carrying with it the man who had broken an empire and asked for nothing in return, leaving behind a galaxy that would never forget his name even if he never spoke it again.